Well, I appreciate everybody sharing all the things they shared about their mothers, and it's one word that kept coming up over and over again, though, I felt like, and that word was faithful. Faithful mothers. How faithful mothers had impacted our life. As you heard me mention, my mom was a woo mom, and she was at every single thing that we ever did, but that also included making sure that we were in church every Sunday, every Wednesday. My mom herself, she worked in the nursery there with the bed babies, and she would do it every fourth Sunday, and they had a rotation, and she loved doing that. She also served on the youth committee at our church, and probably did several other things that I'm not aware of, but she was very active as well. And because of her faithfulness, I am who I am today. I think it's funny that whenever I finally surrendered to the call to ministry in my life, I think I've told you all this before, but I flew to Tampa, led a youth retreat down there, flew back, and when I landed in Memphis, my mom and dad picked me up, and when we were sitting in the car, I just got in the car, I threw my bags in and sat down in the back seat. Mom and dad were up front, and I told them, I was like, well, so much for med school. The Lord wants me to be a minister. That's what He wants for my life. And they just looked at each other, and they looked at me, and they're like, yeah, we already knew that. Like they had prayed about it. They had known it way longer than I had knew it. And I'm thankful to have had a mom who continually prayed for me, who was faithful. And as we read earlier from Exodus 20, Moses had a lot to be thankful for from a faithful mother. His mother, because of her faithfulness, allowed him to become the man that he became, the man who was capable of leading the Israelites out of Egypt in what we call the Exodus into, he brought them to the gates of the promised land there. The land of milk and honey, the land that God had promised them. Before we get started, I just want to do a little Bible trivia from the start. Does anybody know what the name of Moses' mother is? Okay, hold up. Jochebed? Okay, that's right. So although we had this discussion earlier, there is no J sound in Hebrew, and the B is actually a V sound in Hebrew, so it's Jochebed is her name. Jochebed was her name. You know, we don't get the name here in the story that we read, but we get her name later on as we lead, and we see his dad's name was Amram, and his mother's name was Jochebed, and we see the lineage come through later, but here it just starts off and says that a man from the house of Levi went and took as a wife a daughter of Levi. That's all that we get. We find out the names later, but we find out just how influential these two were in Moses' life, especially his mother. We understand that chapter 1 kind of leads off of what we read in Genesis. At the end of the book of Genesis, the 12 tribes have made their way into Egypt. They're flourishing. They're doing well. We get the names of all of these different tribes. But then we read a verse that says, but then there arose a king or a Pharaoh who did not know Joseph. He didn't know Joseph, which doesn't mean that he didn't know about Joseph, but he didn't respect him. He didn't really care about who Joseph was because time had passed on. And from that point on, they saw that the Hebrews were growing and growing and growing in number and that God was blessing them. And they got scared that their country was about to be taken over. So what did they do? They enslaved this group of people. And as they saw the population continue to rise even then, the Pharaoh made a decree that said any male that is born to any of these Hebrews, they're to be tossed in the Nile River. The literal word is to put them out, as to what it is. Leave them to the elements. Put them in the Nile where you got crocodiles and all sorts of other animals that will do serious harm and bring death to this child. And that's where our story picks up today. Because after Moses' parents met each other, they eventually had Miriam first, and then Moses came along later. And Moses was born during the time when these male children were supposed to be put out to die. But instead of doing that, they looked at him. The Bible says that they saw that he was beautiful. They saw that he was good. and they kept them. So today I want to look very quickly at 3 ways that Moses' mother showed her faithfulness in Moses' life and formed him into the man that he was to become. And the first way that she showed her faithfulness was by fearing God instead of fearing man. Even in the face of death, even in the face of punishment for keeping her child, she decided she was not going to put her child in the river, but no, she was going to keep him. She was going to hide him. She was going to do everything she could to keep him alive, no matter what man said about it. Because she knew in her heart that this was not a God-honoring thing. This is not something that the Lord would take pleasure in. She knew that this was something that the Lord would punish Himself. So she feared God instead of fearing man. And there's a lot of debate among scholars about how much the Hebrew people knew about God at this point. But the reason that I mentioned her name and the reason it's important now is because the first part of her name, Yo, you know what that is? That's part of God's name right there. Big seminary word for the day. It's called the theophoric element. It's when they take a piece of God's name and put it in another name or in their name to represent God's name, to say something about God. And that's what her name has, a piece of God's name within it. So yeah, they knew about God. They knew who God was. They were crying out to God for deliverance. They cried out to Him, they cried out to Him, they cried out to Him, and God eventually sends their deliverer. Hebrews 11:23 gives us a little bit more insight into what was going on in her mind. If you know anything about the book of Hebrews, chapter 11, we call this the Hall of Faith chapter, where you got all the heroes of the faith listed out and all the different things that they did. And this is what it has to say about Moses and his parents. So 11:23 says this: by faith Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents, because they saw he was beautiful, and they, pick this up, were not afraid of the king's edict. So she showed her faithfulness by fearing God instead of fearing man, thus saving Moses' life and allowing him to live. The next way she showed her faithfulness was by ensuring a better future for her son Moses. That's what the goal of every mother is, isn't it? To raise their child, to give him or her the best opportunity of life that they can possibly give them. And after 3 months of trying to hide this child, can you imagine how hard it was to hide a 3-month-old? The constant crying, the constant attention that needs to be had. Very, very hard. Something that was just untenable for them, something that they could not continue to do. And realizing that this was not something that she could continue to do and him still have all the life that she wanted for him to have, she had to make one of the hardest decisions of her life. But in doing that, she was being faithful to him to ensure that he would have a better future than what she could provide. Now, some would say, well, putting your baby in a basket in the Nile River is not giving them the best life possible. But one, she didn't just put them in a basket. What does she do to the basket? What does it tell us? She waterproofed it, right? Verse 3 says, but when she could no longer hide him, she took an ark. You know, some versions read ark, some versions read basket. I think it's interesting, we definitely don't have time to do this today, but the same word for ark here is the same word that we see used for Noah's ark as well. A lot of similarities between Noah and Moses that you can draw between these two types of Christ in the Old Testament. But she put him in this basket, and then what did she do? She daubed it with asphalt and pitch. So she waterproofed it to make sure that the water could not get in there with them. And then after she did that, what did she do with it after that? She put it in the river. Or it tells us specifically she put it in the reeds. And this was something that I guess like seeing movies about Moses and seeing movies, I have a very different image in my head about what happened than what the Bible tells us what happened. And you may as well. Because the image that I had in my head before I went back and reread it in preparation for the sermon was she put him in the Nile River. And as she put him in the Nile, she kind of cast him off and he started just floating down the river, through the turbulence, through the waves, through the crashes. If you've seen the Prince of Egypt movie, the animated movie back from early 2000s, you got crocodiles snapping all around them and hippos coming down beside them, And it's like this great grand journey that Moses takes down the Nile River. That's not what the Bible tells us, though, is it? She put him in the reeds. Where did Pharaoh's daughter find him? In the reeds. She put him not just in the Nile River, but she put him in a strategic location where he could be found. It would have been known that the location where she put Moses was the place where Pharaoh's daughter often came to bathe. As they lived there, as they worked there, you see things day after day after day, and you see people's habits, and hey, it's like every morning every morning when I'm driving up here, I know that about time that I get to Cockerham, I'm going to pass two people that go to my home church down in Independence. And every morning I wave at them. Why do I know that? Because it's habitual. They're there every single Sunday. Moses' mother knew that Pharaoh's daughter was going to be coming down to that river. So she didn't just put him in the river to leave him off to his fate. She put him in a strategic location to ensure the betterment of his future. And I think it is very possible that this was all part of a bigger plan. And that's the reason that Miriam was there watching over him. Because as soon as she put him in this strategic location knowing that Pharaoh's daughter was going to be there. And I have a feeling that she told Miriam, hey, when they pick up Moses, before they get a chance to do anything else, ask them if you want them to go get a nursemaid for them. And what happened? She found him. Miriam pops out. She's like, hey, do you want me to go find a nursemaid from one of the Hebrew ladies? And the Pharaoh's daughter says, go. And she goes, and who does she bring? His mom. And I think this is such an amazing part of the story because we've seen through the story so far Moses' mother's faithfulness, but now we see God's faithfulness in return. And our God is so, so faithful. What a reward He gave her. And it was during this time that God had given them where I believe the greatest actions of faithfulness in her life take place. That's because during the time that she was allowed to raise her son Moses, she taught him the ways of their God. We find this out right after the verses that we read. In verse 11, we kind of flash forward to when Moses is 40 years old. And we see from these verses that he immediately identifies himself not with the Egyptians, but who does he identify himself with? The Hebrews. His brothers is what he calls them. He saw them being mistreated, and because he saw them being mistreated, he was angry. And he took action against the Egyptian slave master, and he killed him. I don't think it was on purpose. The Bible indicates that he killed him in one punch, which that's pretty incredible. But Moses had all the military training he could ever want, being a prince of Egypt. And later on in the New Testament, it tells us the reason that he did it. He did it because he thought his brothers would understand that God was sending deliverance by him. Where would he learn that from? Who taught him that the Lord was going to use him to deliver His people from the bondage of slavery in Egypt? His mother. She taught him who He was. She taught him who their God was. She taught him His purpose. And as he grew, he never forgot the things that his mother taught him. And I think there's a moment later on where this becomes even more evident. If you remember, Moses went up on Mount Sinai after the people left. He was up there 40 days and 40 nights with the Lord. The Lord gave him the law. and he gave them the plans for the tabernacle. But when Moses came back down, what were the people doing? Does anybody remember? They were worshiping the golden calf. And Moses, in his anger, he threw it down, and he went back up. God told him to make his own tablets from there. Now, I think it's interesting, he doesn't make the tablets themselves or make the writing on the tablets, but he made the tablets in the shape, and God finished the rest of it. But as he was up there again, Moses begins to intercede for the people, because you know what God was about to do? Destroy them. He was about to wipe them out. He's going to say, Moses, you're the next guy. Everything else is going to stem from you. But Moses intercedes for the people, and he says, Lord, what would our enemies say? What would the Egyptians say if you just brought us out here to die? Lord, these are your people. And the Lord heard them. And the Lord forgave, and the Lord renewed the covenant with His people. And He tells Moses that he has found favor in His sight. And in one of the only moments in the Old Testament where we see Moses ever ask for anything for himself, he asks God a question that leads us to the greatest revelation of God in the Old Testament. As he's standing there and as he's talking with the Lord, he asked the Lord for one thing. And he says, Lord, show me your glory. Where did that come from? The Lord, kavod, of glory. His mother's name meant the Lord is glory. As she raised him, she would teach him that our God is not like these gods of the Egyptians, small and insignificant, but our God is the God of all glory. And because of what his mother taught him, what is the first thing Moses asked God? Lord, show me your glory. A faithful mother impacts our lives for the long term. This was 40 years after all this would have happened. But yet Moses still remembered the faithfulness of his mother, the things that she taught him. And if we think, and as we've already shared today, the faithfulness of our mothers affected our lives as well. I would not be up here right now if it wasn't for the faithfulness of my mother. Many of us would not have come to know Christ and have the relationship with Him that we have if it wasn't for our mothers in our life. Faithful mothers are so important. Moses owed everything to his mother's faithfulness in his life. Many of us owe a whole lot to our mother's faithfulness in our life as well. And we all owe everything to God's faithfulness in our life. So, if your mother is still here, if she's still around, if the Lord hasn't taken her home yet, make sure to call your mother today. Make sure to tell her how much she means to you. If your mother's not still here, make sure to say a prayer today to thank God for the mother that He gave you. And continue to take the faithful actions that your mother instilled in you and continue to pass those down to others as your mother passed them down to you. So, what we're going to do next is sing a song together called the Family Prayer Song. And it's a short little chorus. We'll sing it together. It's not complicated. But it really is a prayer song to the Lord. That's what it is. It just says, Lord, be with our families. Lord, move in our families. Lord, come be a part of our families. And isn't that the prayer for all of us today? Don't we all want God to come and to influence and to guide and to lead us So if you'll stand with us now, we're going to sing the family prayer song together.